While Mazda probably just set a sales record in the United States with a lineup that contains 0 pure electric models, the opposite is true here in China, where their sales have lagged behind, in large part because they have 0 pure electric models. Mazda needed a solution to this problem yesterday, so they turned to a Chinese company to give them an all-electric replacement for the aging Mazda 6 sedan, dubbing it the EZ6. The Chinese company in question is Chang'an, Mazda's long-term joint venture partner here in the Chinese market. They lent their EPA platform to underpin the EZ6. The EPA platform also underpins the Deepal L07, which is a facelifted and renamed version of the Deepal SL03 that we reviewed here on the channel in 2023. If you've ever seen an L07 or an SL03, you'll immediately recognize their shape in that of the EZ6. That's because it is monstrously expensive to change things like hardpoints. That's, for example, where the engine and suspension attach to the chassis of the car, not to mention changing things like the shape of a pillar or the shape of the glass. Those are even more expensive, perhaps. Basically, Mazda was forced to work with what they were given. If you look at the EZ6 with fresh eyes, however, I think Mazda did a fine job. I already liked the lift-back shape of the SL03 and L07, and I think that the Mazda design language that's been applied to the front and rear of this car work quite well with that shape. More importantly, in fact, most importantly in this context, is the fact that it actually looks like a Mazda. And it's a true liftback as well, with a rear cargo compartment that measures 479 liters, or up to 1,174 liters when you lay that 60-40 split second row down. The pure electric version like this also has a massive 99-liter frunk. That's more than 10% larger than a Tesla Model 3. Just like with the exterior, the interior layout is highly reminiscent of the Deepal SL03, but with material quality that is much better than you will find on the Deepal. I'm talking about things like the micro suede lining on the doors, the dashboard, and the seats. Note that I said the SL03, not the L07. That's because this interior layout is clearly based on the SL03 pre-facelift and name change to become the L07. For example, the center screen is 14.6 inches, just like the SL03, but unlike the 15.6 inches of the L07. It also retains its instrument cluster, which was deleted on the L07. I think many of you will agree when I say that the latter part is good news, because I prefer to have an actual instrument cluster in front of me. Another piece of good news is that this car retains the heated, cooled, and massaging front row seats with zero gravity mode from the L07. Also, leg rests on both sides, making this probably the most comfortable Mazda you can buy anywhere. Infotainment and smart features is another area in which Chinese manufacturers are generally ahead of the foreign competition, and that also applies to this car from a Japanese brand. It's actually built by a Chinese brand. Their center screen, for example, is, as you can already see, quite large and has quick response times thanks to a Qualcomm Snapdragon 8155 chipset. The UI, very nice, very attractive, easy to navigate, and basically a reskinned version of the one on Deepal cars as well. And again, better than anything you can get in any other Mazda. All right, enough about the front row. Let's get into the back seat, which, spoiler alert, is not a highlight. That's because just like its Deepal counterparts, the rear seating position in the EZ6 is pretty compromised. Rear legroom is, decent, but headroom quite tight. If this thing goes over a bump, you are not unlikely to hit your head on the roof if you are much taller than me, which is 1.75 meters or about 5'9" tall. Also, the floor, very high, and there's no way to put your feet underneath the seat in front, so your knees end up very far from the seat bottom. It's just not especially comfortable. Back here you do, however, have a small screen for controlling your air conditioning as well as moving this front passenger seat forward and back, giving you more space over here on this seat. I figured Chang'an would bring two major things to this partnership, apart from the platform itself, of course: infotainment and drivetrain technology. I know that they've done their job with the infotainment, but what about the drivetrain? This car obviously uses the same powertrains as the L07, though there are some differences in battery. For example, the L07's base car is 56 kilowatt hours, and so is this one's, but this also comes with a 68 kilowatt hour variant. Ranges are 480 to 600 kilometers on China's CLTC cycle. There's also the extended range variants, which again have slightly different battery sizes than those of the L07 and provide a CLTC pure electric range of 130 to 200 kilometers. The EZ6 comes with a single rear-mounted electric motor making 160 or 190 kilowatts, depending on whether you get the extended range or pure electric variant. Either way, they both make 320 newton-meters of torque. In the case of this pure electric car, figure a 0 to 100 kilometer per hour time in the high 6-second range. None of that, however, is the interesting part about this car. After all, this is a Mazda. It's the ZOOM people, the people who create the fun-to-drive car in any given segment. Were they able to do that with this Chinese platform? As to how much Mazda actually changed the suspension of this car in comparison to the L07, well, the answer seems to be unclear. Some people claim there are actual hardware differences between the two cars, whereas others claim it's really just about a tuning difference. From behind the wheel, I tend to agree with the latter. I drove the L07 and the EZ6 back to back, and I gotta tell you, the difference isn't as big as I kind of hoped it would be. This thing corners flatter and rides a little firmer than the L07, but it's not exactly a night and day difference between the two. This thing does have the zoom factor, so to speak, and it's great to have a rear-wheel drive Mazda sedan again, but if the Deepal is, say, a C+, B- in the suspension department, this thing is a B+. One area where the EZ6 gets only a passing score is in terms of driver assistance. While the L07 is available with a Huawei driver assistance system that isn't quite as advanced as the ones you can get on an Avatar or an Ito, it's still capable of highway and city NOA. This car, meanwhile, has only lane cruise control. Considering the fact that Mazda and other foreign manufacturers are lagging behind the Chinese competition in terms of driver assistance, I'm surprised they didn't push a little bit harder to get their hands on that even light version of the Huawei driver assistance. Mazda is hardly the only foreign manufacturer to be using a Chinese platform for an EV for the Chinese market. In fact, they're not even the only Japanese manufacturer to be doing this, with both Nissan and Toyota having similar cooperation with Chinese brands here in the Chinese car market. But I think the EZ6 shows how you can do this pretty well. Take what's great about a Chinese EV, the infotainment and smart features on the interior, and the battery and motor technology, and inject a little bit of your own brand identity in the terms of the styling, both inside and out, as well, in this case, as some good driving dynamics. Is the fact that all these foreign manufacturers are using Chinese platforms a sign of desperation as they watch their market share slip between their fingers? Absolutely yes. Are these stopgap products intended to fill a hole in their lineup here in the Chinese market as they develop their own dedicated EV platforms? Again, absolutely yes. But as far as desperate stopgap products go, I think the EZ6 is a pretty good one.